Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Landon.
I'm Kason.
So before we get started today, this is a news story that was just a couple hours ago. We heard about this. There's been a shooting at the YouTube headquarters. We wanted to make sure to just very quickly mention that. If you haven't heard about it, what we know at this moment, the time of recording this, is that a woman went into the YouTube headquarters and started shooting. 3 people were injured, as far as the reports are reading now. So we just wanted to make you guys aware of that. It's kind of a crazy developing story still, and send our condolences to those who are involved and those who are affected by it. It's just crazy how often this is happening these days. So anyways, but our first topic of the day that we want to talk about is news that happened as soon as we finished recording our podcast last week, which is almost always happens. I don't know.
News breaks Wednesday mornings.
Like Wednesday mornings.
Needs to be a JRPG 24-hour news channel on cable. Cover it all.
We get a certain level on Patreon. We'll create a 24-hour news show.
That would be quite a bit. That's quite the goal.
Anyways, Dragon Quest XI, right? We talked about this a lot last year on the podcast because it had come out in Japan, and we were really excited about the 3DS version. That's part of what this is all about. We'll get to it in a minute.
I was only excited for the 3DS version, actually.
Yeah. So, what they announced is, one, it's coming out September 4th. That's the release date, which is almost exactly a year after its Japanese release, right? It was in September, I think.
It's July.
Oh, okay. So it's a little bit over a year.
Splatoon 2, I'm pretty sure.
And it is also getting a PC port here in the West. It's going to be released on Steam. So that was kind of a big deal. I got excited about that. That's cool. The really sucky part about this announcement is, one, the Switch version is a long way off from that. The Switch version will not be launched at the same date. It's going to be way later.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, they will not bring the 3DS version. They will not be localizing the 3DS version at all. Here's why that sucks. The 3DS version was the coolest idea.
Yes, absolutely.
It had on one screen sort of like the 3D version of the game, right? The 3DS 3D version of the game. So low poly version, but 3D version. Cool. And then they had a 2D, like 16-bit era looking version alongside of that. So you could kind of play either or both at the same time. Very cool idea. We've talked a lot about how we like the idea of demakes on this channel. Yeah. We'd like to see a modern game coming out, like, so let's say Final Fantasy 16, that had a 16-bit version released alongside it, and you could choose to pick
so good.
Either
one. So sweet.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Or even a step further, if they had one that looked like the polygonal PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
One that looked like the 16-bit SNES, and then one that looked like the modern console version. So,
you know what was kind of cool too is that if you played the bottom screen, if you were focusing on the demake version, you would have random encounters. But if you were playing the 3D part of the game, and that's where you were kind of controlling and doing all that stuff, then you can see the characters and avoid the random encounters. Like, the game actually slightly varies a little bit as you play the game. You can have it that really feels like the games in the 90s where random encounters were more common. I don't know. It's just such a good idea.
It's really cool. And I wanted to see that be something people embraced, something people got excited about, so that we could see other developers or other Square Enix games use the same idea for other properties. Mm-hmm. However, that 3DS version is not coming out here. What are our thoughts on all of this news?
Bullcrap. That's all I like. I was like, oh, Dragon Quest XI, sweet. Like, I didn't really play 10, I think, was online, but like 8 or 9 or 7. I haven't played the Dragon Quest game in a long time. And I was finally going to get back into it because of the 3DS demake, and I'm such a fan of demakes that I was just because they had a demake. Just like, it's like a AAA game company made a AAA game that you can experience as though it was a 90s 16-bit Super NES game. Like, that's huge. Like, to me, and for a lot of people on this channel, that is huge. Because they don't make games like they used to, right? And that's just the biggest throwback ever. And now they bring it to the West, and they're like, you guys don't need this.
Yeah. Well, I'm mad. I kind of wonder how long ago this decision was actually made. You know, like if you're if they had to put kind of things into motion, like let's say last fall, they might have been sitting there going, you know what, the 3DS is definitely going to be on its way out by next year in North America.
Right.
So let's not. Little did they know there will still be brand new 3DS games coming out from Nintendo in 2019.
Yeah.
So knowing that and the install base that 3DS has, they must feel really confident that either Steam is going to compensate and that it won't be very difficult.
Right, because it's going to be on PC now.
And you know what I mean? Like, because there's a lot of 3DSs out there, and they could definitely sell a lot of copies of that. So it could just be more trouble than it's worth localization-wise. Yeah. And that they can get the same bang for their buck just by copy pasting the PS4 version into Steam. I don't know.
I wonder.
Hopefully they don't do that.
They won't get my money. I'll tell you that.
I wonder how different the scripts are between the PS4 version and the 3DS version. I mean, if it's apparently the same game, hasn't most of that translation already happened?
Yeah, probably.
Right. It would.
I wonder if the extra work would be like something to do with the way the two versions interact with this. I have no idea, because otherwise, if they have it done, then it's just.
Oh, it's just a matter of translating, and that's it.
Crank it out. I don't know. It's weird.
Or they've already translated it, like to your point.
Yeah.
Like they just need to put it there and distribute the game. Like that's it.
I mean, I would think it's just a matter of editing a freaking TXT or whatever, just like copy paste from this one into this one, and then that version goes into this game, and then it appears. I don't know.
And well, there's also the issue of voice acting, which is big outside of Japan. People really like voice acting, and
will the PS4
I'm wrong, but I believe these versions will be voice acted, right?
Yeah, I believe so. The PS4.
I'll have to double check on that. Usually that's what they do, right? Usually, they have voice acting when they bring it over to North America. So,
but would that be expected for the 3DS version?
No, I don't know. Like, it doesn't make. The only way it makes any sense to me is if they made a decision like, you know, like I said last fall, where they're like, the 3DS is definitely going to be old news.
Well, and I think there is probably a pretty good reason for suspecting that this decision was made a long time ago, because in the same announcement they said the Switch version is coming, quote, much later, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were not planning on making this on the Switch, like at all. The Switch was not part of their strategy. Right. And obviously Square Enix and almost every company out there is like Switch from now on. But this is not coming out on the Switch, and this would be the perfect game to come out on the Switch. I mean, they made a version for the 3DS, right? That, like, this is a scalable game we're talking about here. And the fact that it won't be coming out on the Switch for a long time means that they just weren't, from the beginning, this just wasn't part of their plans.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Frustrating as fetch, but whatever.
One thing that I noticed that kind of surprised me a little bit when I made the Alliance Alive video was that there were a number of people in the comments saying it's on 3DS. Like, what? Like, why? No! Like, why can't it be on Switch? A lot of people saying things like, no thanks, this is 2018, I'm not going to game at 240p anymore, and things of that nature, right? And I'm sitting here.
Go watch the retro gameplay of Chrono Trigger.
Well, right. You know, I'm sitting here saying I still play freaking NES games like regularly.
Yeah.
I keep all of my old systems for the most part, or at least of the newer iteration that was backwards compatible. So I don't have a Wii anymore, but I have a Wii U because the Wii U can play Wii games. But I still have my GameCube because the Wii U can't play GameCube games, right? Yeah. So I have all of my old systems. I keep them forever, and I still use them all the freaking time. And I go back and play games all the freaking time. So I'm sitting here kind of confused by this sentiment, but I do think that must have something to do with this decision, is that in Japan, I'm sure tons of people are still playing the 3DS. And that system's still probably pretty strong there, even if it's in its waning years. But in the West, they must have this idea that people are over that. They've gotten rid of their 3DS. And I know what a lot of people do too is when something new comes out, they'll trade in an old system.
They will.
So
yeah,
they'll take their PS3 in and they'll trade it so they can get some credit towards buying the PS4.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of people, when they went and bought their Switch, turned in their 3DSs. And I don't know what research or whatever they've done or what data they're looking at to make a decision like this. But it seems to me like, and like I said, it surprised me that a lot of people today are like, I don't want to touch the 3DS anymore, put it on the new thing. And so maybe that has something to do with why they've made that decision.
Well, I remember seeing the numbers in Japan when these games came out, and the 3DS and the PS4 version sold almost identical to each other at launch. And the 3DS has a significantly larger install base in Japan. So they might have looked at that and said 3DS
percentage
underperformed real hard. It could underperform worse than this in North America, given whatever info they have.
Right.
And they decided to just skip for that reason. I don't know.
That could be
which is unfortunate. I mean, business-wise, it makes sense, but it just sucks that a really cool idea was in the version that is for a system that's dead at this point to them.
I know, because when are we going to have two screens ever again? Ever.
I know, seriously.
No one's going to do that again.
That's true. You won't be able, unless you do it on 3DS, you will not be able to have a demake and the playable game on the same card.
It would still be sweet, though, if, say, in the PS4 version or in the Steam version or whatever, if they just had like a button you could press that would just like switch it over to the low poly 3D version and then switch it over to the 16-bit version like on the fly. That would be sick. I still want them to do that so bad for some game eventually.
There should be a hidden arcade that if you find it in the game, you play the arcade and it's the 3DS version right there.
Yeah, dude.
Or just a kid's 3DS that you find like in his room because you rummage through people's belongings. And then it's all right there, and people are going to go nuts on the internet when they find it. Yeah, best Easter egg ever.
Yeah, I don't know. It's unfortunate, but I am excited that it is coming out in September, so we know when it's coming out. But also that there's a Steam version, which ultimately I think is the version I would want to play it on either way. Just wish that they would insert those other ones into it alongside it. Just be like, here you go.
Japanese publishers have been embracing PC for the last couple of years. Finally seeing that happen. Square Enix and Capcom, and so
it's become a legit platform.
That now,
a lot of people want to play on PC in the West.
Yep.
So, anyways, that's Dragon Quest XI. Still very stoked for it. Very excited for it.
Yeah, it'll probably be playable at E3.
Oh, that's true.
English
That's
version.
true. I will probably play it at E3. I'll let you guys know about it then. All right. We also want to talk about Chrono Trigger on PC. It was released a couple weeks ago. A lot of people were pissed about it. And due to that, Square Enix has made an update on the Steam page addressing the fact that they're going to be releasing some patches here in the coming months. I'll just go ahead and read their statement here. It says, "Hi, everyone. Thanks for all of your feedback, patience, and support so far. We've been working on addressing the issues that you've raised, and we'll be releasing a number of patches over the coming months as we continue to support Chrono Trigger on Steam. We're aiming to release the first of these patches in the first half of April, and the biggest change is that it will include an option to switch between the current high-resolution graphics and the original graphical style of Chrono Trigger. We'll post a full list of changes here when the first patch is released. For now, be assured that we're working very hard on adjusting, updating, and supporting Chrono Trigger on Steam. As Chrono Trigger is going to receive patches over the coming months, we are going to extend the availability of the limited edition until 5 p.m. April 30th BST or 9 a.m. April 30th PTD. Okay, so let's clarify first what the limited edition is. The limited edition comes with a track. It's basically just a medley that was arranged by Yasunori Mitsuda, recorded with a live orchestra. It's really, I actually think I used some of that in my Chrono Trigger review. Really, really nice. It'll also come with some, wait, what did it say it was again?
Liner notes.
Liner notes from Yasunori Mitsuda, I think it was. and then some posters, like desktop backgrounds, basically. That's what the limited edition is. That's what it includes. So that'll be available until April 30th. But I think there are a couple things in particular about this statement that I want to address. First being the fact that they're calling their current version of the graphical style the high-resolution graphics.
Yeah, isn't that great?
As if people rejected the high-resolution graphics in favor of the original graphics style. Okay, Square Enix. Oh, you're so stupid sometimes. It's not high resolution that people reject. It's the smoothing filter you have on it. We want the pixelated version in high resolution. Okay, the same thing that you can do on any emulator by just turning it up to 1080p or 4K or whatever it is, just without applying a filter to it, just leaving it as it is. That's what people want.
For them.
Way easier. Like they're making it hard for themselves, but they're
touch
doing
it
this way.
And let you scale the resolution as you see fit.
Yeah.
It's also weird to me that they would phrase it this way because, again, Romancing Saga 2, which was released on the Switch recently, is a high-resolution version of the game with kind of the original pixel art style without like that kind of like smoothing filter put over the top of it. Freaking garbage. So anyways, I understand why they would try and phrase it that way. It's PR stuff, but it's just...
They're trying to make it seem like what they're doing is still valuable, even though nobody wanted it.
It's out of touch. Out of touch. To the fact that you can use our current high-resolution, awesome graphics, or you can use the original one if you want. It's like, geez. The other thing that they didn't address with this is the UI interface, which is something a lot of people don't like because, again, this was a direct port of the mobile versions for Android and iOS. So they have those really big, sort of obstructive text boxes and UI interface that doesn't look very pretty like either the DS version or the original SNES version. So they haven't said anything about that, which is one of the biggest parts of the graphics people took umbrage with in the first place and wanted changed. So hopefully they will fix that in a patch in the future, but I guess we won't know about what changes exactly they're going to make until that first patch is released. Then they're going to have a list of what they're planning on changing.
They'll announce that it's going to be software as a service, and there'll be season pass. And yeah, we're talking about Chrono Trigger patches in 2018. So excited. That's just
that's weird
on some level to me.
Absolutely,
yeah,
it's very strange. In any case, I would love to support Chrono Trigger on Steam. Personally, I like Steam as a platform. I would like to have Chrono Trigger in my list of games there. I just want to have a version there that provides me with the same options and the same experience that you can get on an emulator. It's not that hard to figure out. Please, please. Come on already. Get it together with the Steam ports. Steam ports are so bad from Square Enix. I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's just low effort. I mean, it's clear that they're just coming top down through the corporate ladder and just do this, do that, and they're just not really. I don't know
allocating the right resources.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have. I mean, the people working on it, I'm sure, are super creative, but the people overseeing it just aren't game directors or people who maybe would be making these games from scratch or anything like that. They're just doing what their boss told them to do.
Well, with that said, let's move to our viewer-suggested topics. Got some good ones today. Our first one comes from A.K. Hawkster. Here is the context. My friends and I recently had a conversation about the depth and quality of storytelling in RPGs, and the conversation steered toward the concern that AAA games today have so much time spent on artwork, graphics, and the game engine itself versus character development and story. And it seemed like Final Fantasy XV was a good example of this. I like that Square has created Tokyo RPG Factory and tried to recapture some of the smaller scale development that gave us classics like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI in much shorter development cycles than modern day JRPGs, and ultimately resulted in superior gameplay and longevity for myself and friends. Titles like Persona 5 and Ni no Kuni 2 show that stylized games can still hold their own and thrive, but Square seems loath to experiment with that on their big budget releases in this era. Are Square and other companies that seem to fixate on the graphical presentation doing their games a disservice by trying to look as shiny as possible, and should more games branch out into a style that works so that they can spend time focusing on world building and story development?
I just thought of a great one-liner. I should put this on Twitter. Games as a disservice. That's it. That's what it is. Games as a disservice. Square Enix. Hashtag.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it's pretty logical to assume that when you're spending a large chunk of your development on getting an engine to run correctly, on trying to reproduce photorealistic graphics, and trying to get that to work within an engine with a open world where there are so many variables. You know, games today are so much more complex on the simulation end in terms of what they're trying to render in real time. Certainly, the optimization process there affects a studio's ability to some degree to, make a cohesive storytelling experience. I would also, I guess maybe the devil's advocate side of that is these are two separate things within the development studio. Like, you have artists and you have writers and you have event planners and stuff over here doing their job.
You would think one shouldn't affect the other, right?
Right. It would seem to me that one shouldn't affect the other, because it's not like, oh, we have writer guy over here. Hey, I can't have you writing today because we got to get this engine optimized. So why don't you hop on the computer and help us out with that? People have their own jobs. It's not like someone's being pulled away from this side of the game development to help get this side of it working. However, I'm sure that to some degree it does affect it. In Final Fantasy XV's case, with the rush to have the game out by a certain date because of contractual obligations, they had to cut content, or at least things that they would have liked to have done. One in particular that comes to mind was the Shiva. It's towards the end of the game when you're on the rails and there's like the big frozen corpse of Shiva there. They had a more explorable area, if I remember correctly, that they had in mind for that part of the world where you'd be able to run around and do more there. Something that, one guy had been working a ton on to get it done. They were like, nope, we got to yank that out. We're not going to be able to get that optimized in time for it to be in the game. And so you might have pieces of a game that maybe were intended to be there that they can't get it working in time, so they have to take it out. And maybe that could end up giving you something that feels stunted or feel like there's pieces of it missing or whatever. So I think the answer is yes and no. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are on that, but
it's definitely an issue with the games that take longer to make, because I think if you just imagine that you have to plan a project, not a video game, just some kind of project that's going to take 4 or 5 years of time to complete. And I'm talking active, more active development time here. If you're off by 10%, that's a lot. That's a good chunk of time.
It's like half a year.
So, yeah. In your estimates, if you're barely off, if you're working on something that's only going to take 1 year and you're off by 10%, you're not off by as much.
Yeah, it's
just hard to predict where your resources need to go. And like the studios that are successful these days, I feel like at that scale are the ones that are the most accurate with their projections. and that know what they're getting into the best. That's hard when you're working with a new engine, and when you are working on a game that has problems from the outset, you know, and you're trying to rework things. So to me, it's kind of like I don't doubt that on paper every single bit of the story of Final Fantasy 15 was phenomenal. I don't think that that's the problem. Like you said, Mike, it's not like they didn't have good ideas. It's not like they didn't. It's so many of these things.
Good ideas.
They had really cool ideas.
Yeah.
Stuff that calls back to some of everyone's favorite Final Fantasy games, right? Well, to me, it's more in execution than actual good idea.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of movies that people love that actually have either kind of, I wouldn't say crappy stories, but simple stories, really simple stories. Like if you were to tell somebody the story to Star Wars, like the first Star Wars movie, it just doesn't sound like much at all, really. It's all in the execution and the pacing, and that gets thrown off by misallocating resources in the development, right? So it's like you're under a time crunch, or crap, we hired too few programmers, too many concept artists, we blew our budget on people that were drawing things that aren't even in the game, you know? Like that, to me, that's the problem, because these people are all super passionate. And they all do what they do because, like, if you're an artist in some fashion, like if you're a great painter or if you're a musician, you have good taste. Like, bottom line, like if you're a great author, like you have good taste. Like if you're excelling at this level where someone's offering you money to do stuff for them, like you have good taste. You know what's good and you know what's bad. It's just when you're not given enough time, or there's other constraints and pressures, like your boss sucks or whatever, you know, like all of a sudden, like you don't get that premium result and you're managing a team of like freaking how many people worked on Final Fantasy 15 total? It was like hundreds of people. And then you got a director who's like, okay, like keep this all reined in and take into consideration what the executives also want you to do.
Of course.
And it's just like, it's a wonder that anyone ever pulls it off at this scale. You know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy. So like you said, the fact that Tokyo RPG Factory exists, even though people haven't been 100% happy with what they've done, I think is good, because it can allow them to just have these shorter cycles and maybe figure out some new things that will carry over into these AAA games, new processes. I don't know. But to me, that's more the issue. It's not like there aren't good writers. Like, although I do wonder sometimes how many scripts, so to speak, is Square Enix sitting on right now, because they could have, you could pay a team of like 10 people for a year. They could write your next 5, 6, 7 video games in all honesty. And then
just sit on those scripts.
But, you know, like I think they have a vault of good ideas.
Probably.
I would hope they do, because unless it's like Disney with Star Wars and they're just like, do whatever the freak you want, we're not gonna
whatever director wants to do, just let him do it.
But you know what I mean? It's like, I don't think that's where the fault is necessarily. I don't think that's it. I really don't.
You know what's interesting? The games that have really good stories, specifically from the 90s and even into part of maybe PlayStation 2 era, there weren't as many writers. And that may actually be a good thing. I mean, there's an old saying of like, there's, you know, if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, it'll ruin the broth or whatever.
Too many cooks.
You know, I think of that. Too many cooks. Anyway, so too many cooks in the kitchen equals not a great product, because they're all professionals. They all want to do their own thing. Everyone's adding in their own little spices. And what you end up with is not a good final product, right? When you have one chef and a bunch of underlings that just do what they're told, then you get a good soup. So when you have a bunch of really talented writers, and typically there is a head of story, right, in video games and all that stuff, but there used to be less people under them. There used to only be a couple writers for a video game. Sometimes there was only one writer for a video game. If we're going back into the early,
and the writer was
right?
the director,
and the writer was the director or whoever. And so you've got a system where one person's like writing can really come through really strong, and then you've got kind of the AAA system where you've got, you know, dialogue trees and just all sorts of different things now that they didn't used to have then, and scripts nowadays are like 2,000 pages long. They used to only be 150. Like, you've got issues on that level that make cohesiveness really difficult. And so as talented as these writers may be, they are trying to all fit in with each other in their own unique, ways, and they're trying to build on what the other writers have written, and they're trying to add in things where they see fit without detracting from the vision of the director. And I think that's hard. I think we're seeing that it's harder than it looks. There's clearly no shortage of ideas. There's no shortage of good writers. But what there is, and what there is, as far as I can tell, is just there are too many writers. I mean, I'm just kind of taking a shot in the dark here, saying that might be it. I really don't know. But my experience with a lot of creatives working on essentially the same thing has been that it becomes very slow. It moves slowly, and it takes a long time, and that it's really difficult to get unity and to make it seem like it's one solid, cohesive thing, no matter what it is you're working on. One of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life was the behind the scenes for The Hobbit. You got Alan Lee, and who was the other artist? John Howe. And they were drawing 3D images, right? So they would take perspective. They would draw the concept art in 3D, which is obviously just a shame. It's obviously like they didn't need to do that. It was just for publicity. But these are talented freaking writers, and they can mimic each other's style so perfectly that one of them can draw what one lens sees, the other one can draw what the other lens sees, and they come together as a 3D image that looks like one person drew it. I don't think that's easy to come by. I think that is like rare, exceptionally rare talent. But that's the kind of talent that you need if you're going to have a lot of people writing one script for a single piece of media.
Here's a thought that I had about it too. And again, I don't think this applies across the board, because we're talking about a project in Final Fantasy 15 that was in a really bad development hell for a long time, right?
Yeah, rewrites
When the game was announced as Final Fantasy Versus 13, they had music already written.
Yeah. That
ended up being the theme and the music that was used in the final game 10 years before.
I think Yoko Shimomura wrote that soundtrack 10 years before the game came out. Like, the whole soundtrack had already been written. And she was just sitting there like, when am I going to get credit? When's this going to come out? This is my best work ever. When? And Square Enix is like, oh, one day.
But the fact that there was at least something done on that side of things a long time ago, but then it's being applied in game, in the flow of the story by a different director many years later.
Yeah.
You know that this was yanked out of the context of this scene and then placed over here for the new scene.
Yeah.
That's not quite the same. You also have voice acting that was done for, say, the Duskai demo in a scene that was not in the final game, where they're trying to wake Noctis up in the tent. They're trying to get him up, hey, wake up. And because that was a whole theme of the game, the whole sleeping, dreaming thing. That was a big part of Versus 13 that was totally erased from Final Fantasy 15 by the end. How much voice acting had been recorded for that version of the story that was changed? I mean, we've seen reports, just a few months before the game's released, huge, major changes to story happening. Things like the Astrals becoming gods or deities in Final Fantasy 15, which they were not, only months prior to the game's final release, right? So you had work done, voices recorded, scripts written, music composed and recorded, many years before the game was finalized. And then a lot of this is being changed due to the fact that they couldn't do, let's say, the scene in Altissia the way that they had envisioned in the original trailer of when it was renamed Final Fantasy 15. They showed this crazy sequence in Altissia of all these buildings being destroyed as Leviathan was going nuts, and he's jumping through this building and warping over here, and that whole scene was not at all like that, and the gameplay was much simplified for the final version. How much of that had to be done due to trying to optimize the game, trying to get it to work the way that they were originally trying to within the Luminous engine, which they were developing. So I think there is something to be said about where you're coming from with that, AK. The fact that their attempt to create this photorealistic sort of world rendered with this amazing graphical quality, how can that affect storytelling? I'm sure in the end, we know specifically for this game that it had something to do with it. I would think we can say that fairly confidently. How often that's happening with other studios, I mean, kind of hard to make a determination on that without some, insight into what's going on.
Final Fantasy 15 is an outlier. Like, it's an absolute outlier. How often has this happened? Like Duke Nukem Forever, it just doesn't happen. Yeah, this crap doesn't happen this way, at least. Obviously, the issues are real issues, but like Final Fantasy 15 it's bonkers. So to talk about the problems Final Fantasy 15 and Square Enix have had, I think it's easy to forget that. I don't want to be too optimistic, but hopefully this never happens again. Maybe I may be saying too much, honestly. I don't know. But you would think this would never happen again. Right. It's an expensive mistake for sure.
Well, giving one director your like 3 projects that are massive to work on at the same time. Maybe they at least won't do that again, right? I hope.
Yeah. In any case, you'll see
style though. Like, I mean, there is something there because when we talk about like what I said before, how it's hard to get everyone on the same page, especially when you're doing something that's not stylized. It's just super realistic, and everyone's got their own interpretation of reality, honestly. But when things are stylized, it's easier for people to look at it and to get what they need to do. It's easier for an artist to match a style than it is for an artist to match like reality versus somebody else's reality or something. I don't know. Like, I do think there's something to be said there.
Yeah, I think that it's not like a game, because this is a sentiment I see kind of growing too. Oh, you should go for a more stylized look. That'll have a greater longevity. You'll come back to something. Right. And if it was, let's say, Wind Waker is a great example, right? So the graphical style of Wind Waker versus Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess was not realistic. I mean, he's still got a very anime face, right. but more so than the cartoony style of Wind Waker. And which game ultimately ends up looking better in the long term to return to? The stylized version does, generally speaking, because what the GameCube and Wii could do for a realistic style versus what the PlayStation 4 or a really high-end PC game can do now is just night and day. And that will only continue to be true exponentially. Well, actually, probably not, considering that the returns on...
Moore's Law ended, didn't you hear?
Yeah. So, Moore's Law, right. Anyways, so backtrack a little bit on that. But the point is that when you go for a stylized look, generally speaking, it's going to be a little bit easier to return to that. And it's not going to look dated necessarily as much as something going for realistic look. However, it still can be executed very well. The Witcher 3 is a very realistic look. I think that is a game that was executed just phenomenally well on almost every level. And I think that game will have great longevity moving forward. There are games that meant to go for a realistic look in the past that will have longevity too. So it's not that a realistic style is the problem as much as it is trying to optimize and being obsessed about, probably trying to bite off more than you can chew, which I think was probably the problem with Final Fantasy 15. I mean, they show, and we've talked about this too, showing things off at this stage of development too early before you really knew whether you could do it. Showing off that scene with Leviathan in the way they were originally imagining it in 2013 or whenever they announced it was now Final Fantasy 15. This is what's going to look like. That now people expect that. And then you realize, yeah, we can't pull that off. You run into some big roadblocks, and it's like we have to change the whole freaking scene. And yeah, so that is, I think, the key difference between CD Projekt Red and Square Enix. CD Projekt Red says we're working on Cyberpunk 2077 or whatever it is. End of story. You don't hear a single freaking thing about that all the way up till now. It's been years. They refuse to show you anything, which is very smart, until they have something finalized first. Until they can say, this is what it is, and this is in the game, and this is done now. Now we can show you what it is. So, kind of a combination of problems. And like Landon said, I think FF15 is more of an outlier than it is the rule for modern AAA development. So, but yeah, I do think there is something to what you're saying. I do think that if you want to pull back, if you want to scale back, do something that is more stylized. The development cycle is way shorter. You can turn it out quicker, and you can be a little bit more ambitious with your ideas in the story, because you don't have to freaking render an entire city being blown away by freaking huge water simulations. You can just show that in a 2D art style, and you can do whatever you want, right?
People are kind of forgetting that Persona 5 was delayed multiple times as well. It took a long time for us to get Persona 5. Like games just freaking get delayed. It just happens. And their art style, I don't know what all the reasons were for the delay, but the art style changed throughout its own process too. But that's not a silver bullet. That's not gonna, not focusing on art style doesn't mean that you're not gonna have other issues with the game engine or whatever else the actual bugs are that you're running into, especially if it's open world, because that's crazy. Like, we never made an open world game before, and you're like, hey, we're gonna make an open world game. Nintendo and Square Enix both had to delay their games massively to make it happen.
And Nintendo had to bring in Monolith Soft to freaking get it working.
Yeah, they did a ton of extra help, because it's just like, I think it's that how much work will this take, and they were definitely underestimating what it was going to take. But something I was thinking about, though, when we talk about kind of Final Fantasy as a franchise and art style in general, is I feel like at this point in time, Final Fantasy is married. Now, mainline Final Fantasy is married to a realistic art style. Like, I don't think they could backtrack it at this point in time. Like, I think people expect Final Fantasy to be pushing the boundaries on what realistic, fantastical graphics can look like. And they basically have been for so long now, that I don't know if they announced Final Fantasy 16 and it was like cell shaded and it was like Persona 5.
I know, it'd be a real.
I feel like, I don't know, I feel like people would revolt, but they can do that with their side franchises or other more experimental stuff. But I just don't feel like they could. I feel like they're kind of tied. Their hands are tied a little bit with.
Unless they have a little button and you can switch between the PS1 polygonal age and the 16-bit SNES age. Then everyone will be pleased.
Then everyone's happy. You can do it both ways.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna have my cake and eat it too, man. Anyways, great question, AK Hawkster. Hopefully,
very good.
Hopefully that is insightful in some way. Okay, let's move on to Raberdeen here. In your opinion, why do strategy RPGs seem to be less popular than their turn-based, action-oriented cousins? He says, Fire Emblem aside. However, I want to say Fire Emblem cannot be put aside, because I think it answers your question. What would you do to make them appeal more to the masses and less of a niche genre without losing their key traits, i.e. great storytelling and strategy?
I know, one, get a strategy game RPG made with Super Mario. And that'll help it appeal to the masses a little more.
Yeah, with Mario vs. Rabbids or whatever it's called.
Mario Rabbids, yeah. Kingdom Battle.
I think, how well did that game do? Did that sell well?
Wow, did that game do well?
I don't know what the numbers were.
I hope so, but I didn't.
They got great reviews.
I wanted to buy it, and I never ended up buying it. I think I will eventually someday get to it, because I do want to play it. But it's a tough question, and I think that there are very many rabid fans of classic Fire Emblem that could jump in and give their 2 cents on this for sure in the comments. But, okay, like I said, we can't throw Fire Emblem aside because I think it answered the question. What did it do? It put in some dating sim elements, and it brought in a whole bunch of people.
Yep.
And so that was one way in which they tried to keep elements of the original thing, the strategy and all that kind of thing, while inserting something into it that appealed to a wider range of people. Now, whether that hurt the integrity of the original ideas or not is a topic for debate. Maybe that we will have some other time. But that is
Fire Emblem debate. That would be great, dude. Let's do like a call out. If you're a hardcore or OG Fire Emblem fan who's pissed, and if you're a Fire Emblem fan who came in at Awakening and you're stoked, sign up in the comments.
What's so weird about it is that I am an OG hardcore Fire Emblem fan, and I also love Awakening, and it's so baffling to me. Like the people. Okay, we'll just skip this. Sorry, we'll move on. Listen, I think that strategy RPGs are tough because at their heart, at least originally, the philosophy behind their design was that they were generally pretty tough games. And the whole idea is to make you think. Its strategy is built right into the freaking subgenre. Strategy takes effort and thought. It takes planning. And that's not necessarily what someone who wants to come home and relax wants to do. They want to come home and relax. They want to be odd. They want to be entertained. They want to be excited. And sitting at a planning screen, looking at your enemy's unit layout, and thinking about, oh, wait a minute, like maybe this will go here, and then how should I counteract that? You spend half an hour to an hour just freaking planning the freaking battle to begin with.
And then you lose.
Yes, and then you lose.
The motivation
right?
to go back in, realize your mistake, and do it again, and have an hour battle again.
Yeah,
that's a tall order for some people.
That is a tough sell for the average person, I would say. And why that creates this niche sort of atmosphere around this particular subgenre. So now, how do we make it appeal to more people without losing that? I think that's a paradox. I think that's very difficult to do. You either make the game easier,
smarter.
You make the game easier, which hurts it at its core.
Right.
Or, which is what Fire Emblem Awakening did, by the way. They took away the option, or they made permadeath an option, and they made an easy mode. So they made it easier for people to get into, and they didn't have to suffer the consequences of permadeath if they didn't want to. So that automatically made it more appealing to a wider audience, and then they added in some dating sim stuff. So that's how they did it. I don't think that's a perfect answer, obviously, but it's a very complex issue to address because the people who are really into strategy games are into it because of the thought, because of the effort, because it's hard, because they have to think and plan and strategize. And the people that don't want to do that but still want the story, it means you basically have to make them an easy mode. So
yeah. Well, and then you have to ask yourself too, what's the point of making a subgenre appeal more broadly? Why? Why does it need to appeal more broadly? I mean, if they're not selling enough, and if companies aren't making them because they don't sell, and the genre is going to go away, then I can understand that. But if it seems to be there's Disgaea, there's a Mario, Raven's Kingdom battle. There's Fire Emblem killing it. What else is still being made that's SRPG right now?
XCOM.
I
guess you could maybe say Civilization kind of fits into it to some degree, but
a little bit.
It's even more complex.
I would actually be very interested in a Civilization where it would zoom in on a battlefield and you had a legit SRPG battlefield. That would be really cool. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to go away. And there's an issue, like, for example, on Reddit, when a subreddit becomes a main auto-subscribed subreddit, when new people sign up, they're automatically added to it. It loses, like, quality, so to speak. Like, you bring people kind of
right.
just, like, I don't know, like, so some, like, the futurology subreddit went pretty downhill when that happened. So you go from it being like people who are really passionate and interested about a highly focused thing to a broader, more general audience that has a passing interest, and they want things to appeal more to them, and then nobody's happy. So,
Yep.
although, like you're saying, Mike, Fire Emblem freaking did it. I mean, honestly, I think on the whole, Fire Emblem is doing very, very well, even if they upset some people.
Yes. I think that with Awakening, at least, while upsetting a subset of very, very hardcore, passionate fans of the older style, it was still plus 90% of people were absolutely, enthralled by it. I think where they've slipped up is with the ones that have come after, most specifically Fates, really struggled to get most people to be super stoked about the series. But let's see what they do with, because I mean, Echoes sort of, it was a straight remake of a freaking old game, so it kind of returned a bit to some of the older, design philosophy, and we'll see what they do with the Switch Fire Emblem, which is supposed to come out this year.
There's a lot of Switch games supposed to come out this year.
I'm stoked about that.
I don't know.
You can do touchscreen stuff, hopefully. It drives me nuts, any Switch game that doesn't support the touchscreen at all. Like, even just for menus. Like, I think they should all... Nintendo doesn't even support it for menus in most of their own games. Like, the crap, you guys.
Yeah, the touchscreen is not really a thing. I don't think I've ever touched the screen on the Switch before, now that I think about it. I don't think I've ever done it. I don't think I've ever done it.
My left Joy-Con freaking got jacked. Dude, so I sent in my left Joy-Con to get fixed because it, the issue from the original batch of them, and they sent it back, and then, like, the left joystick was completely jacked, and I can't click it in, which is what you have to do to recalibrate it. So I need to send it back again, and I'm Nintendo fix it again.
Jeez, that sucks.
Anyways, so I had to use the touchscreen to navigate because the left controls weren't working at all.
That sucks.
But yeah, I think a Fire Emblem using the touchscreen on the Switch could be awesome.
Well, and then we haven't even touched on Fire Emblem Heroes, which was certainly meant to be for a wider audience, but I think that incorporates... I don't know, I haven't played enough. I can't really say, but it seemed to be, at the outset, it's real easy when you start out, but, like, it just sort of has this, like, real gradual increase of difficulty to where I think the average person can sort of scale with that, appropriately or whatever. And then of course they got their gacha, so it's like, I just give me a strong character, please. I'll pay you for it, so I can get past this part, which is a whole issue with hardcore players. But I don't know, man. It's really hard to say. And I can't say that I have an answer to it. I would just say leave it, like Lana was saying, leave it as a niche thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, as long as someone is still making these games and they're still of a certain quality, then, it only becomes a big problem when people stop making these games. And I'll admit, there are a lot less of them now than there used to be. Like Advance Wars back in the day, that was super fun. I haven't really seen that since. I was wondering if there's a way to do an SRPG that was like an action strategy RPG. So, and that's Battalion Wars. Yeah, that's straight up Battalion Wars. And it to a lesser degree, that's also these Hyrule Warriors, what they call Dynasty Warriors kind of games, but more so the Battalion Wars. But I don't know if they made a sequel to that or not, but I haven't really seen those games.
Valkyria Chronicles kind of does it to where you can come down into one character, run them around and shoot, but it's still a little bit turn-based. It's not like fully action, but they kind of do that in Valkyria Chronicles.
I'll tell you what, though, the strategy RPGs they're slower, the battles are longer. It's obvious to look at it and say why it's not as popular, right?
Yeah, but no random battles though. So
It's like every battle's a boss battle, though.
it's
Like every battle is a complex,
it's like the
big
Monster
battle.
Hunter oh no, it's the Dark Souls.
of RPG of turn-based RPGs.
But yeah, no, I think I don't really have much more to add to this one. Making it appeal more to the masses would destroy the whole niche of the genre, and you don't want to do that. So
Yeah, I agree. I think some things just let them be what they are. I think you can still make pretty good money with a niche.
I think so.
You can't blow up globally, have like a 12 million sales, game or whatever.
Although
But
I
you
wouldn't
can
be
still-
opposed to another Final Fantasy Tactics.
I mean, like the Nihon Falcom games are a pretty good example of this, right? Like
Yeah.
they're never like massive sellers, but they're very popular among a certain group of people.
And there you go.
They just keep making games. I mean,
Yeah.
like all the time is freaking new trails of game coming out. So, there's definitely money to be made in the niche. I don't think people need to worry about having everything become super mainstream.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thank you, Raberdeen. Good question. Xylon73. So, Mike, your Alliance Alive video got me thinking about how a lot of JRPGs have lost puzzle-solving elements in their design. JRPGs nowadays, like the Trails series and the Tales of series, now have linear dungeons with chests slightly off the beaten path. I remember games like Golden Sun, Lufia 2, and Tales of Symphonia where every area would have a puzzle to solve. Would you like to see that return, or do you think that just slows the game down too much? Thanks as always. Dude, I was playing the Alliance Alive, and it was like, oh, there's a freaking puzzle in this dungeon. And I've been playing Tales of Berseria, Trails of Cold Steel. I spent some time with Persona a while back. I feel like this is true. A lot of these modern RPGs, JRPGs, they kind of have traded any sort of puzzle-solving element for just like longer dungeons with lots of fights in them and treasure to pick up. And I would say personally, I much prefer fewer fights, shorter dungeons with some puzzle solving elements in there that make you scratch your head for a minute and try and like figure out like, okay, how do I get out of this room versus let's go down 6 more flights and get to the bottom of this place and look in every nook and corner and cranny for a freaking chest.
There's so much about RPGs that are just purely tedious.
Yeah.
And those are the aspects that are so prevalent.
And for me, Tales of Symphonia, I'm not the biggest fan of the way the dungeons work in that game. There was a lot of
agree with that.
backtracking
Yeah.
in that one in particular. That I remember getting pretty frustrated with, like, flip the switch and then run up here, do that thing, but oh crap, your timing was bad. Go back and flip the switch again. But I really liked Golden Sun, though. Like, that's a game that I think is a shining example of how this can be done. Really.
Well, one that I was thinking of was Vagrant Story, actually. Vagrant Story had just I don't know, it's such a weird game, but it did so many things so well, and that was part of it, was the mergence of fighting and RPG. It's like almost action RPG, but not a button masher, but it's not straight up a turn-based RPG. And then they've got this whole, every place you go to has these big puzzles to solve. Some of them are really hard.
Yeah.
And like, that was really cool. Like I remember being surprised because I had heard about Vagrant Story. I didn't play it when it came out. I only played it like within the past maybe 5-6 months ago. And I was surprised. I was like, wait, I have to do a puzzle? What? Oh my gosh. Games don't do this anymore that are, this type of game doesn't do this anymore. But I thought it was awesome.
I agree. I loved the puzzle solving in Vagrant Story. Yeah. And I'm seriously, that's why I was so surprised by the Alliance Alive. Again, here's the thing. People keep asking me, you going to do a follow-up video on it? Like, where are you at in the game? Here's my problem. I played through that first dungeon that was in the demo. Then Atlas was like, thanks for making that video. Holy crap, how are you not on our freaking press list? We want to send you a copy of the game.
Well, I'll tell you, we have asked to be on their press list before, but that's, anyways.
Anyways, so I download the game, and it's like I play through that first dungeon again. And then it's like, you know what? I love this game too much. I can't just accept a free copy. I have to go buy a copy of this game. So I go out and buy a physical copy of the game, and I play through that first dungeon for a third time. So I've have an accumulation of probably about 6 or 7 hours played, but I've only beaten that first dungeon. So I don't know to what extent this is a thing throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, dude, make an FAQ.
Dude, I actually was thinking about it because I did it pretty differently. I ran across this other monster and I learned a little bit more about how to quickly gain abilities and stuff. Anyways, I could totally write a sick FAQ for like the first hour of the game. But
Game facts.
Anyways, so I don't know to what extent puzzle solving is an element of the game's dungeons past that first one.
Okay.
But that I would love to see that more often. I think that would make games like Persona, and as much as I do enjoy Trails of Cold Steel, even that game, I think would be so much more interesting if the dungeons had puzzles in them to solve. Had something more to do than just run and fight and grab chests and run and fight all the way from beginning to end. I don't know why it has disappeared in the way it has. It kind of went under the radar somehow. I kind of like Case, and it was like, oh yeah, this used to be something you saw all the freaking time.
Yeah, it's surprising now. It's weird.
And don't have it anymore. Even in games like Final Fantasy VII, which aren't known for puzzle solving, they at least had all kinds of different sorts of things that were used to break up how you are interacting with the game. Yeah, so let's take the Shinra Mansion, for instance. The entire thing with we're either going to run up the stairs over here and have some funny dialogue, or are we going to go straight through the front gate? And then you have the trying to figure out the freaking mayor's password by reading all the different books in the libraries and find out which ones are out of place. You had the
Final Fantasy VIII did that really well too.
Yeah, puzzle solving was so common in JRPGs at that time, and it's not anymore. And yeah, I do think it needs to return for sure.
I wonder if they have data on playtesting where it's people get stuck at the puzzle and they quit. They quit playing our game, so let's just take the puzzle out so they'll freaking keep playing the game.
As much as I love Golden Sun, that is what happened to me with Golden Sun 2.
Yeah, those are some hard ones.
Golden Sun, The Lost Age, I think it is. I got really far in it, and it got to a point where I was in a room. I couldn't figure out the puzzle. I ran around trying all my powers out and every freaking tile in the whole place. And it's I don't know what to do. And then I look up online the guide for just trying really hard just to look at that one part. And it's okay, oh, geez, okay, that was the answer, fetch. And I did it. And I go to the next room, spend an hour running around using every power on every single freaking tile in the whole place. And it's gosh dang it. Go back to the same thing. Oh, okay, geez, that's how you do it. Get in the next room, same thing happens. I can't take this anymore, dude. None of these puzzles are intuitive at all. So to some degree, that can be a detriment. And maybe that is what happened, is that players were getting too frustrated or something happened where let's just do away with this. But I think that bad puzzle design is not a reason to exclude puzzles altogether. Just, make it a little more intuitive, and but still try to make it something the players think about a little bit. It can just go a long way to breaking up the tedium of battling over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, totally.
Okay, thank you, Zylon. Good question.
Xylon.
Bring the puzzles back. # we want puzzles in RPGs again or something.
Not my puzzle. No.
Ray Ivory has our final question for today.
Yes.
What does a game evolving mean to you? Many I talk to look at Breath of the Wild and Final Fantasy 15 as the evolution of their gaming franchises, but you will see some state that games the same games completely changed their genre. I'm sorry, I probably butchered that. He's trying to say, is it an evolution or did it completely change it altogether? It's not the same thing anymore.
Right. Did it jump or was it natural?
What does it take for a game to evolve for you? Would you consider games like Breath of the Wild as an evolution or just a different take? What are some games you think evolved, and what are some that you think didn't? Love to hear your thoughts. Okay.
Interesting.
I have to say, first off, I love the use of the word evolve just because it implies this idea of like you need to change or die.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like think
Yeah.
like Darwinian, like natural selection. It's just
True,
like,
true, yeah.
if everything's trying to change to get a competitive advantage, if you're not also, you're screwed in the long run. And that's
Right.
kind of like what I think some of these franchises, like and big companies like Nintendo and Square Enix, they see that. They're like, okay, we can't just keep doing. Now, Square Enix has never done the same thing every time, so to their credit, but Nintendo definitely has. So,
Yes.
so that was, you know, like a evolve or like be eaten kind of thing. Anyways, I like the use of that
Me too.
terminology.
I
Yeah.
actually think that the Zelda games are not a good example of evolving, like in general at all. I feel like you can see a natural progression from the first Zelda, not to the second Zelda, but from the first Zelda to A Link to the Past. You can kind of see how one became the other, and the only difference was it's a new console and they added some things or whatever, more buttons. But Zelda has like a very long history of changing more things than they needed to in order to kind of find a new market. They're constantly trying to recapture the general audience, like over and over and over. And they're changing way more things than they need to. And one Zelda game hardly resembles the one before it. Unless we're talking about like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, right? But that should be a given. That's not what I'm talking about. Like Wind Waker to Ocarina of Time, I would not consider that an evolution. That is a jump. That is a massive change in the like everything they're doing aside from Z targeting is still there, right? And then Twilight Princess, the whole art style was basically reaction to the fan base not liking Wind Waker. Basically, it wasn't a progression of how the game kind of went. Now they did keep certain elements like the timed action hits that Link will do a flip or whatever, you know. And when somebody swings at you, certain things carry over. But you go to Skyward Sword, and they were forced to make that game around the freaking Wii pointer, right? It wasn't a natural evolution. It was oh crap, we have to change the whole way this game's played because the console isn't what we've dealt with in the past. And then, gosh, you have Breath of the Wild now, and it's like these aren't evolutions. Like there's no natural path here. These are massive changes to try and recapture a general audience. Every iteration of Zelda, every new iteration that we see, that's my perception of it. Final Fantasy, I see way more of an evolution there because you see with Final Fantasy 12 and to some extent 11, I guess, but they slowly get away from the turn base, right? But it's still kind of an RPG turn-based thing. It's just not, you're not selecting everything everyone does. And then you have Final Fantasy 13, where it's like, hey, it's still also kind of sort of turn-based, but there's way less control over exactly what's happening. And then with Final Fantasy 15, it's just straight up action. There's a smooth flow there. There is an evolution one to the next. They didn't just jump into it. There you go. I thought.
Let's see that.
I think it's really hard to say because, like Casey is saying, I think one person might look at Zelda's, like say, let's say Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time, and I could see someone making an argument that that was an evolution. It moves into 3D, but you still have dungeons that are very similar. You still have similar items. You still have a similar story. You still have light and dark world that they're kind of playing with, sort of thing, right?
Right.
And I could also see the argument that it's like very different the way you play it. The whole Z targeting thing being added into it. The changes in art style across them being like massive jumps and not necessarily as smooth evolution. I think that maybe you could consider what they've done with the two recent ones, console ones anyways.
Skyward Sword.
Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild as sort of an evolution.
Those are probably the closest of any.
Like they basically were like, okay, we have this Wind Waker and we have this Twilight Princess, and we sort of combined the two and get what is it? Skyward Sword, and then Breath of the Wild, while a different kind of style, sort of the same thing. It's like a halfway between a painting thing, but with like, anyways. So I could see it both ways, and I think that maybe that's why you asked the question, because it's an interesting thing to debate. But with Final Fantasy, I would see a huge sense of evolution. You know, one thing that's said a lot, and I think was really pushed with Final Fantasy 15, with when Sakaguchi showed up at the unveiling event or whatever it was, and said something along the lines of, Final Fantasy's always been about challenging yourself with every single new game and not doing the same thing. And however true that may be for like, oh, we're doing a new story and we're making a completely new setting or whatever, gameplay wise, like gameplay elements, I feel like Final Fantasies 1 through 9, and to some degree 10, but not as much, pretty much the same, but I would consider them an evolution gameplay wise. They just added a little more here, added a little more here. I mean, they did abandon some concepts like job system that was started in 3, was iterated or evolved in 5, but then you didn't really, well, I guess it just kind of became materia, right? So that could be seen as an evolution too, rather than a complete jump or overhaul. Or so I don't know. It's a hard question, because I look at Final Fantasy 15 as being changing what the genre was, a complete genre shift. It is no longer what Final Fantasy was before. But there is something to what Kaysen is saying that has been sort of slowly happening since Final Fantasy X, basically, with 11 being an online game, and then 12, sort of, they're trying to step away from strictly turn-based. They're trying to make it more action. And it's like, well, people didn't like quite how we did it there. Let's take the same sort of idea, make it more actiony and fast-paced, but keep the menus. Anyways, there was still menu selection in 12. But anyways, they tried to do a different version of that halfway action, halfway turn-based thing with 13. You know, people didn't respond super well to that. And 15 was just straight up action, pretty much. So, but again, that was never meant to be a main series entry. That was meant to be a side project. So, does it really count? I don't know. But I would say that 15 is not an evolution of the series as much as it is just a total jump into a different genre altogether, or sub-genre, I should say. Breath of the Wild, I could see it both ways. I could see it as an evolution. I could see it as a total jump.
I think it's important to look at it maybe in this way. Take Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 15, right?
Yeah.
Massive jump. It's hard to tell how one got to the other. Then you add in all the other games and you follow the path, and it's pretty easy to trace. Zelda 1 to Breath of the Wild is actually closer.
I would say
it's pretty easy to see how one became the other. But once you throw the games in and how they got there, it makes no sense how they actually got there.
Yeah.
It completely is not that. From the very next Zelda game was nothing like that first one. And then the one after it kind of returned, but then the next one changed it. And it's a totally like meandering river of, you know, ideas that led to what otherwise would be a pretty obvious evolution from 1 to Breath of the Wild.
I mean, at least Zelda is still a real-time adventure game, right? You're still going around pressing a button to swing a sword, and you collect different items.
You got your hearts,
I mean, more or less, like at its core, it's still pretty much the same idea.
Right.
Final Fantasy 15 is really not the same idea as the old ones. So I would classify FF15 as being that jump, but I would classify Breath of the Wild as being
you put those games in between 1 and 15, and
it's harder.
You kind of see how they got there.
Sure. But I guess that's, for lack of a better way to think about this, or I just can't come up with a good answer, so I'm just going to say it this way. If the center of the game is still pretty much the same thing, but you've iterated on it, you've made quality of life changes, you've deepened it in some way, added layers to it, I would consider it an evolution. And like Kaysen said, if we're taking the original Legend of Zelda and Breath of the Wild, I would say, if we're just comparing those two things, pretty much that's what it is.
Yeah.
But
pretty easy there.
If you're taking the original Final Fantasy, which is 100% different combat-wise, exploration-wise, I mean, all kinds of things. Yeah, it's really not the same thing anymore. So that would be my way of classifying whether or not something is an evolved version or not, is whether or not the center of it can be classified in the same genre or not. Not necessarily on, I don't know, whether or not it keeps the same art style or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying things can't evolve to become different species. That's what you're saying.
Denied evolution.
Actually, that's a very fair point.
No, as a joke, but is what I would look for is like in biology, you're looking for like things that were there originally, like vestigial limbs, essentially. You know, they become something, right? It was something. It was an arm, and it became a wing. Now you have a bat. You know, it's like the stuff is there to begin with, and what you got out of it is somehow stretching something you had originally in a way that maybe people hadn't thought of before, or whatever hadn't thought of before.
All right.
So like you're saying, Zelda 1, it's pretty easy to see a lot of the core elements that are there, but then there's a ton of crap like that's completely different. Like you have these extra layers of interaction, but they operate on the same underlying principles, I guess you could say, as what you were able to do in the original game. That's why
it's true. Even with Skyward Sword, you're waving your arm all around, but you're still performing the functions that you would have just used the two buttons.
You still just could have
like Trails of Cold Steel, which I'm kind of playing right now. The battle system is an evolution of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy and Shin Megami Tensei and like all those old school JRPGs. It's got way more to it, but it's the same idea. Freaking Final Fantasy 15 is not that. It's just not. It's not. That doesn't mean it's bad. That's not to say it's bad. It's just not the same thing. So I wouldn't call that an evolution, unless we are saying, as is true in the real world, mutations happen and things become totally different species. That's still evolution. It's just radical evolution in one generation that just like went nuts, and then that one, procreates, and then you have like a whole different thing on your hands, right?
Your eyeballs and
holy fetch, that's crazy.
That would have to be a mutation.
That's still classified as evolution.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It's true. It's true.
If you demade Breath of the Wild, you probably get Zelda 1. If you demade Final Fantasy 15, you get like I don't know, like what game would you get? What NES game?
Remember and you had the paper delivery boy.
Paper boy?
Yeah, paper boy. No, that was a joke.
But Terranigma, what else?
Maybe?
Crystallis.
Tales of Fantasia.
Something like that. Tales of? Well, no, that's not really true, is it? That's still not the same thing. Never mind. That was a stupid thing
to an action RPG that I could think of for the old times.
Oh, well,
Illusion of Gaia, Terranigma,
honestly,
all those
the closest
Quintet
things
games.
that Final Fantasy 15 would resemble would be a Zelda game if you brought it back to like the NES.
Like Zelda if you were fighting with friends.
Yeah,
like Four Swords. Four Swords Adventure.
Do you think Final Fantasy 15 is
except
just
in the future?
That's pretty funny, actually. Four Swords with quests. Four Swords with cars.
With cars, yeah.
Anyways, that's a tough question, man. I don't think I can answer
the
it.
The whole open world thing kind of makes it like, okay, neither of these games took a natural evolving path to open world. Like you can't trace it, you can't see any artifacts of that occurring other than Zelda, the first one, but they got away from it for so long.
Well, and Final Fantasy, the first
that was an
one,
evolution.
Kind of.
That's true with exploration. Gosh, that is kind of funny.
I don't know.
Like open world is something that these games are coming back to as opposed to like a new concept. But it is still technically evolution in the sense that the competition around them is forcing them to do this.
Yeah, right.
So, I don't know.
Natural selection.
There's too many different ways to interpret what is evolution and what is not evolution.
Yeah. I'm sure that many of you will be unsatisfied with that answer.
Yeah, sorry, people.
You're probably going to quit the podcast now.
Cold turkey.
This podcast going down the drain, dude. It's freaking every week, like losing quality. The fetch wrong with you guys?
You missed the good old days around like podcast 70, podcast 80.
What the fetch was
Those
podcast
are the
70?
classic golden times or whatever.
Podcast 70. Which one was that?
I don't know.
Podcast 70 was. Oh, that was Lore Runner, dude. That's quality podcast.
Yeah,
That was
we've gone down since
We've
then.
gone downhill ever since then. People keep asking to bring them back, and it's like, dude, go back to the 70s, man. That's when the Dark Pixel
70s.
podcast was at its height.
Oh, great.
That's hilarious.
I have
Well-
just because I'm curious, what is a franchise that you guys think has evolved like very smoothly?
Tales of.
Tales.
I think so. But
Yeah, that's probably pretty. That's
that's
probably pretty
more
rare.
obvious, but it's so easily traceable. And that's the way I'm interpreting evolution, is does it still resemble the original, and can you trace back how each step in the evolution came? And I feel like for Tales of, it's
I think that thing's a pretty.
but that may
pretty
also
awesome.
imply that it hasn't evolved that much. And maybe
That's
that's
true.
not a great argument, I don't know.
Maybe it's too similar to how it was.
Yeah, that's possible.
I mean, like Mario games, I think,
Yeah.
for the most part, the big
Yeah.
leaps are like Mario
See,
64.
Galaxy
Mario 3,
is like, where'd that come from, is what I'd see there.
Galaxy,
But they haven't really returned to that. They've gone back to what the 64 was,
yeah.
Mario's a good answer, though. I would agree
Yeah, I
with
think so. Donkey Kong. Those are literally the same.
Old standbys, the old standbys.
They're the same game.
that. Old standbys, dude.
No evolution.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ray Ivory. Thank you, everyone else, for your questions. If we didn't get to your questions this week, I tried to answer everybody that we didn't pick on Patreon. So I'll try and do that in the future, where I'll send you a quick response on Patreon if we didn't pick your particular question. And if I didn't respond with like a legit answer, it'll be like, hey, ask this again next time, or we'll consider this for next time, or something like that. Too bad, so sad.
River and get over it.
Just gotta deal with it, man.
Yeah.
It's just how life is sometimes. Sometimes you don't win.
Teach them a lesson.
Anyways, thank you for your questions, for your participation in the podcast. We appreciate you guys a lot. If you're listening to this audio only, you can find us at Dark Pixel Gaming on YouTube. Case just put out a Dark History video on Monday. If you've not seen it yet, many of you have not. Watch it.
Watch it, people. Come on.
I mean,
Watch
there's
the video.
62,000 of you people out there. We need you to go watch that video, please. Anyways, appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you again next week. Peace out.
Peace.
Yeah.